Hey guys, this is John from US Dash Camera. Today I got a review on the Mini 0807. Now, I wasn't going to review another mini camera. I have reviewed two of the prior models, and I'll provide links to those reviews down below. And the reason I didn't pass on this one is because it actually has a Obd Power Cable, so instead of plugging into the 12-volt cigarette socket or hardwiring it, you just connect it to the Obd port, which is typically under the steering wheel, under the dashboard on the driver's side. It's pretty similar to other mini cameras. This one that I got is the 1080p model with GPS, and like the other mini cameras, the GPS is built into the mount. So here you can see it has an Umbrella A7LA50 chipset, and it says 1296p, which is not correct. It only has 1080p, like I pointed out there. And what's pretty cool is, like some of the other mini cameras, it does actually have two microsd card slots, so you can have up to 128 gigabytes. Besides that, it has some pretty standard specifications like wide dynamic range, high dynamic range. But again, the really cool part is the fact that you can connect to the Obd port, and that allows you to use the parking guard function, which is just a parking mode. And this parking mode is actually better than a lot of the other cheap Chinese cameras that I've tried, so we'll talk about that later. And you can see there is an optional Cpl filter, which I do not have. The Cpl filter just reduces the reflections in your windshield. So let's take a look inside. We do get a pamphlet that tells you about the parking mode. So it says 11.8 volts, but you can change that in the settings because 11.8 is pretty low. Ideally you want it at 12 or even 12.2, especially if you live in a cold climate. So we got instructions, microfiber cloth. Then it comes with this plastic film that allows you to temporarily mount the camera on a windshield. So it does have instructions on how to do it right here. So if you're interested in using it temporarily, you can, but personally I don't think it seems very convenient. It actually seems inconvenient. I would actually rather just buy a camera that's a lot easier to use on a temporary mount or suction cup mount. But like I said, the option's there, so that's nice that they include it and have instructions for it. We got a standard data transfer cable. We got some extra adhesives and cable clips. Here is the GPS mount, so that's what your camera will mount to in the windshield. So we do have a standard power cord, but then the Obd power cord here. So like I said, this will just plug into the Obd port right under the dashboard on the driver's side, and it's really easy and really convenient. So I really like cameras that have Obd port connections, especially if they can power it. Some cameras actually have an Obd function, but it's not where they get power, it's just to get car information. So what's interesting is there's two separate power inputs, one for the Obd port or one for the standard car charger. So if you want to use the Obd, you'll just have this small barrel plug, and the actual camera has its own micro USB power cord or power port also, which is pretty convenient because when you take this off the mount and bring it in your home, you can still power it without the mount. So let's go ahead and start it up. Now what's funny is the box said you can have two 64 gigabyte memory cards, but the instructions say 228 gigabytes. So it's a little funny that it's inconsistent. I didn't have any memory cards 128 gigabytes to test, so I wasn't able to try that. But the instructions are pretty good for the most part. They do explain all the different functions pretty well. And it does actually have three different parking modes. It has a pretty standard motion detection parking mode, which I didn't really like that much. A pre-record mode, which is like if it senses an impact, it'll actually save a clip, and it is actually buffered. Plus there's a time-lapse mode. So I would recommend going through the instructions because the buttons on the actual camera are really confusing. So for example, the big red button on the front locks the current file if you want to save a file, but a long press will actually mute the volume. So there you can see that little icon is muting and unmuting when I hold it down. Down here on the bottom you can see the two memory card slots. We got a power button here on the side. Up top we have another power port like I mentioned before, and an HDMI out. And then here on the side we have what I think is the worst control scheme ever on any camera I've ever used. And I don't hate this camera, but I hate this button. It's a slider switch, and if you hold it up it'll do one menu, and then if you hold it down it'll do another menu. So it's really annoying to me. I always forget which is which, and you can actually click it in like I'm doing to select menu items. So there you can see I went through the resolution, the quality, the AE meter mode, which is a feature I've never seen on a camera, but it's an automatic exposure setting, so you can set where you want the automatic exposure to focus on. ADAS is the Advanced Driver Assistance System, so that'll, for example, beep if you're following a car too close. And this setting here allows you to set where your hood or where the road is in orientation to the camera's angle. We got the flicker here. In the US you want it set to 60 Hz, otherwise street lights will flicker in your video. We got a white balance setting. I would just leave it on auto unless you live in an area that's always cloudy, then maybe you might want to consider that. We got an exposure level setting, TV type, which will be NTSC in the US or North America, how long your clips are. You can actually flip the video orientation. We got a motion detection if you want to run that while you're driving. Got some time settings. The power off screen function will shut the screen off after a certain amount of time, but if you have the screensaver, which I turn on, it'll actually display speed limit on the screen at all times. You can actually change what displays on your video. If you want to add a driver stamp or license plate, you can do that. Of course, we have the GPS stamp if you want to have coordinates displayed, and a speed stamp. I typically turn that off. Got a G sensor sensitivity. You can turn the GPS on or off if that's important to you. We got miles per hour instead of kilometers. And now we have the parking mode, which I'll show right now, the different options. With pre-record, it's actually buffering some video. According to the company, it's buffering it internally, and then like in this example, you'll hear me getting into the car and set it off. So about 10 or 15 seconds after I shake the camera, it saves this clip. My concern was whether or not it was actually buffering it internally or to the memory card, because if it was buffering it to the memory card, you'd be doing a lot of write processes to the memory card. But the company assured that it is being buffered internally, then saving to the memory card when it senses an impact. So then we have the low frame mode, which will be always recording while your car is off, but it'll be 1 frame per second, so everything will be in fast motion. Now, I'm not a big fan of this because, while it will capture everything, it makes it really hard to find the actual video that you need. I would prefer having the impact sensing, so I know the only clips that are going to be saved while my car's parked are where there is an actual impact. So it's nice that this is an option, though. If for whatever reason people prefer this mode, then the option's here. Now the last one is motion detection, which I would not recommend, because as you'll see coming up, I came out of that door and got into my truck, and it didn't record until after I already walked by. And I wasn't running or anything. I gave it some time. I just walked at a normal pace, but by the time the motion detection triggered and started recording, I was already gone, or I was already in my car, so I don't personally recommend this motion detection mode. The impact pre-record mode is clearly the best option to me personally. So there are a couple other settings on here, like the beep sound. You can actually change the volume of the beep or turn it off. Then we got the language. Got a couple different languages in here. You can format the memory card, which is always recommended you do in the camera. You can actually set which card you're recording to, or just have automatic recording or switching between them. Here you can see firmware is from October 9th of this year. Then we do have the viewing software firmware. So it does have quite a lot of features. The Chinese cameras keep catching up to Korean cameras, it seems like, so I do like that. This is one of the first parking modes with impact sensing that I think is good enough to rival a lot of the Korean cameras. Now, I should point out that you do need the OBD port to use the parking mode. So I'll show you where my OBD port is. It's right under the steering wheel, and it's a white plug. Sort of looks like a serial port. And there it is. So I have it connected in my car, and you can see it said 0 miles per hour. And one thing I've noticed is the GPS seems to be very spotty. It seems like at least half the time the GPS isn't even working. And on the last mini camera, the Nano Q I reviewed, a lot of people complained about that to me. I didn't have that much problem with mine, but with this one I definitely did have a lot of problem. So there you can see it was coming on and off. So here's some footage, and if you ever want to know if the GPS is working, just take a look at the bottom right and you'll see the GPS coordinates. You'll see in at least one clip it's all zeros because the GPS wasn't locked and it wasn't getting any data. So that's sort of disappointing, but personally I don't care about GPS that much. If it didn't have it, I wouldn't even care. But I know it's important to some people, so I did want to point out that yes, as you can see in this clip, the GPS does have issues on this camera, like a lot of people have reported with previous mini cameras like the Nano Q. But overall, I am actually very satisfied with the video quality, and it's pretty standard 1080p, 30 frames per second. But the video alone is over 15 megabits per second, and that gives you quite a bit of detail when the car is actually moving pretty fast, compared to some 2-channel systems that have as low as 10 megabits per second. You'll notice they start to look blurrier or grainier, and this camera, even at night, I think is pretty good. When I drive by some street signs, I can actually read them in the videos, and a lot of other cameras I've been testing recently have had poor night quality, so it's nice to actually try another new camera that I don't feel like the night suffers a lot in. I've tested some recently where I'm driving through a pretty brightly lit intersection like this one, and I can't even read the street name above the street lights. And I think that's pretty unacceptable, so I'm happy that this camera actually has pretty good video quality, even at night. Now the audio is nothing special, but here's a clip.
Amerifactors will give you cash right now for your invoices, and there's nothing to pay back. We simply buy your accounts receivable, and if those clients don't pay on those invoices, we take the loss.
So overall, I am actually happy with this camera. Now, there is the big problem with the GPS. A lot of people have complained about prior mini cameras not having good GPS, and I finally got one of the bad ones apparently, because my GPS seems to only work about half the time. So that's disappointing. But like I said earlier, I don't really care about GPS that much. What I really care about, typically in a camera, is a good parking mode. So I love that this camera has that pre-recorded impact-based parking mode, and it's so easy to just plug this into your OBD port that anyone can install this camera. It doesn't have any complicated hardwiring or anything, so I really love that. And another awesome thing is some cars have fuses that are always on. Typically it's trucks where all of the fuses will be on even if your truck is off, and the cigarette port will be always on when the truck is off. So this gets around it because you can actually just connect it to the OBD port, and the OBD port will know when the truck is off, and the camera through the OBD port will actually be able to shut off. So if you have one of those vehicles that has always on fuses, this is an excellent option, especially if you're looking for something with a parking mode, because you don't have to worry about any sort of fancy switch install or connecting into your ignition switch. So this is a lot easier. So with a pretty good quality video and all these other features, I think this camera is a great option for currently $112 on Amazon. So if you're looking at this camera and you don't mind the issues with the GPS, I would say go for it. I think it's a great option if you want something with a good parking mode, but don't want to pay for a high-end Korean camera. Now, this was sent to me for review by Sky High Electronics, so I'd like to thank them for sending this review unit out. If anyone is interested in purchasing this camera, I will provide some links down below. As usual, if you like this video or my other videos, I'd appreciate it if you hit like and subscribe. Otherwise, drive safe, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.